In this video, I'm going to show you how you can make a complete website using React and Contentful. Before we move any further, I would like to show you a quick demo of what we will be making in this tutorial. Let me start by giving you guys a tour of the home page. The first thing to notice on the home page is this full screen image carousel. Notice the text and the call to action button. You will also notice on the bottom there is a left and the right navigation arrow buttons. Using these buttons, you can navigate through the different slides of Carousel. So when I click on one of these navigation buttons, you will see that the slide changes, and you will also notice that the text slowly fades in from the top. You will also notice that you can use your mouse cursor to drag and navigate through the previous or the next slides of this image carousel. If you scroll down slowly, you will notice there is an About section. And this About section has some text and the image. One important thing to mention here is that all the data that you see on this website is coming from Contentful. If you scroll down more, you will notice there is a featured categories section. This section will showcase 6 featured categories. You can choose in Contentful which categories you would like to display on the home page as featured categories. Here I would like to mention that this website is about recipes, and every recipe that you enter in Contentful can belong to one or more categories. And this same exact concept you can apply to make a blog website or a product catalog website. If you scroll down more, you will notice there is a View All button. If you click on this View All button, you will be brought to the categories listing page where you can see all the categories coming from Contentful. If you scroll down more, you will notice there is a featured recipes section. This section, just like the section above, it will showcase the latest 6 recipes that are coming from Contentful. This section also has a View All button on the bottom. And similar to the section above, if you click on this button, you will be brought to the recipes listing page where you will see all the recipes that are coming from Contentful. If you scroll down more, you will notice there is a section called Contact Us. This section features a fully functional contact form built using React and powered by Netlify forms. And under this section is a simple footer with just some simple copyright information. Now, if you look at the top, you will notice our site header and the nav bar. If you click on the links, you will be able to navigate through the different sections of our homepage. Let's click on the categories right now, and you will see that you will be brought to the featured categories section on our homepage. One important thing to mention here is that our website that we will be working on is going to be completely responsive. And this is how it is going to look on a smaller device like a mobile. You will notice that our website is still looking beautiful, and our menu is a full screen menu. As compared to a single horizontal menu, we have a full screen menu, and if you click on one of these menu items, you will navigate through the different sections of the home page just like the desktop. Okay guys, before I start working, I would really appreciate if you guys can hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. It would really motivate me to make more such videos for all of you. Contentful is a content management platform that lets you create, manage, and publish your content for any digital channel. In simple terms, Contentful will let you create and manage the content for your website or a mobile application. It also gives you the APIs that we can use to fetch our content and display it on our front-end application like React. Since I have an account with Contentful, I will start by logging into Contentful. If you don't have an account, you can simply create a new account. After logging into a fresh account, you will be asked to create a new space. You can create a new space and head over to this section, which is called Content Model. Content Model is where we will define the structure of our content. I'll start by creating the content model for the full screen image carousel. You can name the content model whatever you like, but in my case, I'm going to prefix the name of my project for every content model that I will create. If you look at my screen right now, you will notice that I already have 2 different content models created. These are the content models that I created for my other projects. For this project, we will start by creating a new content model called Kitchen Carousel. Kitchen is the name of my project, hence I will add this prefix for all my content models. So I'll click on this button and I'm going to call it Kitchen Carousel. Click on Create button. Now that we have created the first content model, we will create the fields for this content. Looking at this slide for the image carousel, we have to think what are the fields or the different types of data that we will need to create in our content model. So we will need a title. We will also need a small paragraph of text, and the third field we will need that will contain the URL to our background image. We will start by adding our very first field for our image carousel. So I will click on the add field button and I will create a field of type text and I am going to call it title. Now click on the create button, and this time I am going to create another field for the short paragraph. So I will click on the add field button again. It will be a field of type text and I am going to name it description. Click on the create button again. And now at last I am going to add a field for our background image. So I will click on the add field button, and this time it will be a field of type media and I am going to call it image. Now click on the create button, and once we have the three different fields created for our image carousel, I can go ahead and click on the save button. Now that we have the content type already created and saved, I can start entering the data to populate the content for our image carousel. I can click on the content tab and click on kitchen carousel from the left panel. And now you will see there is a add kitchen carousel button. Click on this button and click on kitchen carousel. Let's start by adding the data for our very first slide of the image carousel. So let me go ahead and enter the title first. So I'm gonna copy some title and put it right over here. I will add some description, copy this, paste it. And for adding the background image, I will click on add media. I will click on add new media. And I already have a background image selected, so I will just drag and drop the image right over here. And now click on the publish button. This publish button is going to publish this background image, this media. You can then click on the back button. Once you have the title, the short paragraph, and the image ready, you can then click on the publish button to publish this particular slide. As you can see, I have added some data to populate the slides for image carousel. Now that my data is ready, I can start working on my React application to consume this data and work on my image carousel component. I will start by creating a folder on the desktop and I am going to call it kitchen. Once the folder is created, I will open the folder in my terminal and I am going to install create React app. So I will do npx create React app dot and hit enter. Once the create React app is installed, I am going to open the folder in my Visual Studio Code. And also I am going to start the development server. So I will do npm start. Before I start working on my project, I will do some initial cleanup. In Visual Studio Code, in the source directory, I am going to get rid of all the files except index.js, index.css, and app.js. So I'm going to go ahead and remove all of these files. Now, since I got rid of these files, I'm going to remove the usage of these files and unused import statements. So I will go to index.js. I'm going to get rid of this line, save this file, go to app.js. I'm going to remove these two import statements and I'm going to completely replace this header with an h1 tag which says hello world. Now let's save this. Now at this point, if you come back to your browser, you will see hello world printing on the screen, which means everything is good so far. Now in my project, I'll come to my package.json file and I'm going to remove these 3 lines. These are the dependencies that I don't need for my project, so I'm going to get rid of them. And now I'll save the file. And since I need to get the data from Contentful, so I will install Contentful as a dependency. So I'll go to my integrated terminal and I will type npm install Contentful. Once Contentful is installed successfully, I will also install Node.sass as a dependency. I need this dependency because I need to use the SCSS files in my project instead of the CSS files. So I'm going to do npm install node-sass, and there is a specific version which is 4.14.1, and hit enter. Now at this point, we are ready to start getting our data from Contentful and actually start working on our React application. Now let's go to Visual Studio Code in our source directory, and I'm going to create a file called client.js. This client.js file will contain the API keys that will help us get our data from Contentful. So I'm going to write import star as Contentful from Contentful. Now I will create a const. Client will be equal to Contentful dot create client, and I'll pass an object with 2 properties, a space ID and some access token. These are the 2 values that I need to get from my Contentful. These will be the API keys that we will need, and I'll show you how to get that. Now I will go to my Contentful account and I will click on settings, and then I will click on API keys. If you look at my screen right now, you will notice I have 2 API keys that belong to my other projects. I will create a new API key by clicking on this button, and I'm going to name it test. And this is the place where you will get your space ID and the access token. So you can copy these values of space ID and the access token and paste it in your client.js file on Visual Studio Code. I've already copied my keys into this file, and now the only thing remaining is I need to just add an export statement so that this file can be imported and used by the other files. And now I'm going to save this file. That's it. But before we move any further, I would like to move these hard-coded values, hard-coded API keys into environment variables. And in order to do that, what I need to do is come to the root of my project, and I'm going to create a new file. And this file will be called .env.development. Inside this file, I'm going to create 2 different variables. So these variables will be called React app space ID and React app access token. As the name suggests, this variable is going to hold the space ID and this variable is going to hold the access token. So I will go to my client.js. I will cut out this space ID and put it right over here. And the same thing I'm going to do with the access token. So I will cut this value and paste it right over here. I'm going to save this file, and now these API keys are not hard-coded anymore, and now they are assigned to the environment variables that I can use for any of my files. So I will go back to my client.js file, and in order to use this variable, I can refer to the environment variable that I created by saying process.env.react_app_space_id, and the same thing I'm going to do for the access token. So process.env.react_app_access_token. Now I can save this file and I can start working on my React component. Now I'll come to my source directory and create a new folder called components. Inside this folder, I will create another folder called Carousel. And inside this folder, I'm going to create a new file called carousel.js. and I'm going to use the snippet RAFCE in order to create a functional component. And for now, let's just return an H1 that says kitchen carousel, and let's save the file. In order to see this file, I have to include this file in app.js. So let me go to my app.js file. I'm going to import the file that I just created. So I'm going to say import carousel from .components/carousel/carousel, and right under the hello world statement, I can use my newly created carousel component. So I'm going to say carousel. Let's save this file and let's go to the browser to check what we have. So I'll go to my browser, and here I see kitchen carousel being printed on the screen, which is a good start. Let me come back to my carousel component, and I am going to import useState from React. Let's save this file. And since I'm importing useState, I'm going to create two different states here. So I'm going to say isCarouselLoading, that is my very first state, and CarouselSlides, which is my other state. So CarouselSlides is basically the data that I will be getting from Contentful, and I'm initializing this as an empty array for now. And isCarouselLoading is a boolean value, and I'm setting its initial state to false. So that means right now the carousel is not loading, but as soon as the carousel slides are being fetched from the server, I will set its value to true. And when the slides are already loaded, I will set back its value to false. So now we will start working on the function that is going to fetch all the data from Contentful. Let me start by creating a function called getCarouselSlides. So this is the function that is going to fetch all the data from Contentful. So I'm going to set a try and a catch block. So I'm going to say try and catch. If there is any error, the catch block is going to catch the error, and then I'm going to log that error into the browser console. So I'm going to say console log of error. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to set up a try and a catch block. I'm going to try to fetch the data. If it is successful, I will do something. And if it is not successful, if I get some kind of an error, I'm going to log it into the browser console. Now I'm going to start working on the logic of fetching the data from Contentful. So since I'm going to fetch some data from the server, I have an option either to use the promises or to use the async await. And in my example, I'm going to use async await. So let me first of all convert this function into an asynchronous function. In order to do that, what I will do is I will come over here and I will type async, and I forgot to put a const here. So let me put a const, and then inside the try block, I'm going to create a variable called response. And this response variable is going to hold the response that we get back from the server. And since it is an async function, so I am going to await. And at this point, I'm going to make the use of the client variable that we created in the client.js file. So if I go back to my client.js file, you will notice that this is the client variable that we created. I'm going to make the use of this variable. So I will say client, and there is a method that I'm going to use. It is called getEntries. So I will say client.getEntries. And inside this function, I'm going to pass an object which specifies what type of content I'm going to fetch from Contentful. And if you want to know the content ID that you are specifically trying to fetch from Contentful, what you can do is you can go to your Contentful account, and you will notice I'm in my content model. And on the right hand side, you will see there is something called content type ID. For me, for my example, it is kitchen carousel, which is in camel case. So I am going to just copy this value, go back to my Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to specify content underscore type, and that will be the kitchen carousel. That is exactly the same value that I copied from Contentful. At this point, I can come to the next line and I can do a console.log of response, and I will save the file. Now you will see that this is an async function that I created, and I'm calling client.getEntries, and I'm making a request to the server to fetch the entries of type kitchen carousel, and I'm just trying to log into the browser the response that I get back from the server. So at this point, if I go back to my browser, I will not see the console log appearing in my browser, and the reason is because I have created this function but I am not calling it anywhere. In order to call the function, I'm going to import useEffect. Under this function, I'm going to call useEffect, which will take a callback function, and here I'm going to call my function, which is getCarouselSlides. So I'll copy this, paste it. I'm going to call this function. useEffect also has a set of dependencies, so I'm going to specify this array of dependency. I'm going to pass this function again, which is getCarouselSlides. At this point, if I save my file and go back to the browser to see what I am getting in the console, let me go here and let me refresh. So if I go to the browser, you will see that I'm receiving an object from the server. If I expand this object, you will see there is something called items, which contain 3 different entries. These are the entries that I'm interested in. So what I will do is I'll come back to my Visual Studio Code, and right under this line, I'm going to create another variable, and I'm going to call it response data, and that is going to be response dot items. Let me save this file, and instead of logging in the browser the complete response, this time I'm going to log the response data that I received back from the server. So let me save this file, go back to the browser, and if I refresh, you will notice that this time I am receiving an array of 3 different entries, and this is exactly what I want. So I will go back to my Visual Studio Code, and at this time you will see that I am getting some warnings. And basically what it is telling me is since I am putting the getCarouselSlides as a dependency, it is better to put it directly inside the useEffect. Or if I don't really want to put it in the useEffect, then what I have to do is I have to import a use callback. So I will import use callback, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this complete function and put it inside a use callback. So I will say use callback, and inside this I'm going to paste this function. And just like useEffect, use callback also comes with a set of dependencies. So right now I don't have any dependencies, so I'm going to just put an empty array over here. I will save this file, and if I go back to my browser, everything will still be working perfectly as expected. Now we are getting the data from Contentful, and at this point, if I want, I could have saved the response data directly into the component state. But before I do that, I would like to clean up the data a little, and let me show you why. If I go back to my browser, and if I inspect, go to the console, you will notice that I am getting the data, and it is in the form of an array, and it contains 3 different entries. So let's inspect the data a little. You will notice there is 2 objects inside every entry, and one is called sys and the other one is called fields. Inside the sys object contains the ID for this particular entry, and inside the fields object you will notice there is a title, there is a description, and there is an image. And if you open up the image, it again contains a sys and a fields object. If you notice, you will see that it is not super easy to access the data. So I'm going to set up a cleanup function that will take the raw data from Contentful, and it will return a clean data that I can easily integrate into my application. So I'm going to create a new function called cleanUpCarouselSlides, and I'm going to create this function right over here. So I'm going to say const cleanUpCarouselSlides, and this is going to be an arrow function that will take the raw data, and it is going to return me an array with the clean slides that will contain the ID, the title, the description, and the background image. Now at this point, I'm going to start mapping over through the raw data. So I'm going to create a const and I'm going to call it cleanSlides, and that will be raw data dot map, and the map method is going to take a function as an argument. It is going to map over through each and every slide, and we saw in the console that every single slide contains two different objects. So I'm going to destructure the slide object to get the slide to get the sys and the fields. These are the two objects that I am getting inside the slide. And inside the sys object is the ID. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say const, and here I will destructure the sys object to get hold of the ID. And after getting the ID, what I'm interested in is the slide title. So I will say const slide title, and that is going to be equal to fields dot title. And right after this, I'm going to create another const that will be the slide description. So I will say slide description, and that will be fields dot description. Now when we looked into the console, you might have noticed that the image contains two more objects called sys and the fields. So getting hold of the image, I'm going to create another const, and this will be called slide bg. I'm calling it a slide background image, and to get hold of this I will say fields, because the image is inside the fields object. Inside the fields object, I will go to the image object that will have another fields property, and then I will get hold of file.url. So this is going to give me the URL, and that I'm going to save it in the slide background. So I have the ID, I have the title, the description, and the background image. Now I'm going to create another const that will be called updated slide, and this updated slide is going to be an object that contains the ID. It will contain the slide title, the slide description, and the slide background image. So I will say slide bg. That's it. I'm going to save it here. So at this point, I'm mapping over through the raw data, and I'm creating an updated slide, and in the end I'm going to just return the updated slide. So what I'm doing here is basically mapping over through the raw data, cleaning it up, and I'm just getting the values that I need. So basically ID, title, description, and the background image, and the new array is being saved as cleanSlides. Once I have the new array, what I can do is I can directly set it as a component state. So basically I can just call set carousel slides, and here I'm going to pass the new array, which is cleanSlides. Now my function to clean up the slides is ready. I'm going to wrap this function in a use callback with an empty set of dependencies, just like the previous function. So I'm going to cut this part. I'm going to say use callback, and inside this function I'm going to just paste it and provide an empty set of dependencies, just like the previous function. Everything is good so far, except the fact that I am not calling this function anywhere. I have the function ready, but I am not calling it anywhere. And in order to call the function, just after the console log, I can call the cleanUpCarouselSlides function, and I am going to pass the response data, which is the raw data, as an argument. Let me do that. I can do this, but there is a better way to handle this. At this point, I can see if the response that I am getting, if it is not a falsy value, then I am going to clean up the data. And if it is a falsy value, then I'm going to set the component state as an empty array. So here I'm going to check if response data, if I'm getting some response data, then you do the cleanup of the carousel slides. And if it is not, then in that case, I can take the set carousel slides and set it as an empty array. Now at this point, inside this function, you will notice that my VS Code is giving me a warning that there is a missing dependency inside getCarouselSlides. And when I hover over it, it says there is a missing dependency called cleanUpCarouselSlides. So I'm just going to include that dependency here. And I'm going to save the file. Everything is good so far, except the fact that we are not making the use of the state isCarouselLoading, which is a boolean state. So now we have to think, when should we set the loading state to true and when should we set it to false? So as soon as we are trying to fetch the data from the server, we have to set this state to true. So we are trying to fetch the data from the server right over here. So the first line of this function, I am going to set the isCarouselLoading value to true. Now the server is going to respond either with a success or with a failure. And right after getting the response, whether it is a success response or it is an error response, we have to set its value to false. So I'm going to go right after the console log of error and I'm going to set the value to false. And the same thing I'm going to do right over here. I'm going to set its value to false. That's it. Now I'm going to save my file. At this point, I am done with fetching and cleaning up of my data, and it is being saved in a component state called CarouselSlides. So let me log it into the browser console. So I am going to go just before my return statement and I am going to say console.log of CarouselSlides. I also noticed that I do have another console log sitting on the line number 27. I am just going to get rid of this console. Let me save this and let me go back to my browser. And if I inspect, go to the console, and now you will notice that I am getting an array with 3 different objects. And every object, you will see that I am getting the ID, the slide background image, the slide description, and the slide title. So what I will do is I will come back to my Visual Studio Code and I'm going to start working to output something on the screen. So I'm going to get rid of this H1 and here I'm going to map over through my carousel slides. So I'm going to say CarouselSlides.map. The map method is going to take a function, and inside this function it is going to loop over through each and every item of the array, and I'm going to return something. So I'm going to put the return statement, and what I'm going to return is basically a div with a class name of slide wrap. So I will say slide wrap. Inside this div I'm going to put another div with a class name of text wrap. So I will say dot text wrap. Inside this div I'm going to put an h2 and here I'm going to say item dot slide title, and right after the h2 I'm going to put a paragraph of item dot slide description. That's it. Now at this point, if I save everything, let's go to the browser and you will notice that we have the real data that is being printed on the screen right now. So we have the real title coming from Contentful and the small short paragraph that we entered. Everything is working perfectly fine. Now I will come back to my Visual Studio Code, and here right before the return statement I'm going to destructure this item. So basically what I will say is I will say const and I'm going to destructure the item, and it will contain the ID, slide BG, that is the background image, slide title, and slide description. So instead of saying item.slide title, I will just say slide title and I will just say slide description. That's it. This div that we see over here, the top level div, that represents the single slide in my carousel. And here I want to put a background image on this one. So I'm going to use an inline styling. So I will say style, and here I'll put 2 curly brackets and I will say background image, and that will be inside the strings. I will have to say the URL. So I'm using the backticks because I have to use the template literals, and inside the URL I'm going to put a dollar curly brackets, and here I will call slide bg. That's it. At this point, if I save, let's go to the browser, and you will notice that the background image is being shown right now. So we do have everything being displayed on the screen right now. Only thing is it is not being styled properly. But even before we start working on the styling of the carousel, I would like to take this whole thing and put it in a different component called Carousel Slide. So right inside the carousel folder where I created the carousel.js, I'm going to create a new file, and this time I'm going to call it carouselslide.js. Inside the carouselslide.js, I will use my snippet RAFCE again, and this time it will receive some props. And here I'm going to just take this complete thing, just going to copy it and paste it right over here. Let me save this. So basically from the props, I'm going to destructure the props. So I will say const, and I'm going to destructure the props object. I'm going to receive the ID, the slide title, slide description, and the slide background. Let me save everything. So we have created this carousel slide, but I am not using the carousel slide inside carousel.js. So I have to include it. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to just remove everything, and instead of returning something, I will just return carousel slide, and I'm going to pass all the other props. So basically I will say slide title is going to be equal to slide title. Slide description is going to be equal to slide description. The same thing, slide background will be equal to slide bg. And also, since I am mapping over through the data, so I have to also provide a key attribute. So I will say key will be equal to the ID. This is a unique identifier, so I have to specify the ID right over here. That's it. So at this point, if I save, let me go to the browser, and still everything should be working fine as expected. Now at this point, we are ready to start working on styling our image carousel. For this project, I decided to create a partial file for each component. So I will start by creating a folder in the source directory, and I'm going to call it partials. So I'll go inside my source directory, create a new folder called partials. And inside this folder, the first file that I'm going to create will be called _variables.scss. So I'll create a new file called _variables.scss. So I already have defined some variables that I'm going to use for this project. So let me just copy and paste those. So I have the variables defined for some colors, and there is a breakpoint variable. I'll save this file here, and then I'm going to create another file, and this time I'm going to call it _globals.scss. So this partial file will contain all the styles that I would like to apply globally for all the components and also for the body. So I will copy and paste some of the basic styles that I have already defined. Let me save this file, and now I'm going to create another partial file, and this time I'm going to call it _carousel. This partial file is going to contain all the styles for the image carousel that we created. So I'm going to copy some basic styling that I have already in place. So I'm going to just copy this and paste it right over here. Let me save these styles, and then I'm going to walk you through some of the style definitions. So this is the styling for the slide wrap. This basically represents a single slide. And what I'm saying is that the minimum height for this slide should be a minimum of 100 viewport height. The width is going to be 100%. There is a display flex property with align items center and justify content center. That means the content inside the slides is always going to appear in the center vertically and horizontally. I already have a background image that I have included as like an inline styling, but I am giving the background repeat the background size. I have also put a position relative here, and at a certain breakpoint I am changing the minimum height to be a 110 viewport. I am checking if the orientation is going to be a landscape, and then I am changing the minimum height to 110 viewport height, and I am changing some padding. The same thing I am doing over here. If the orientation is portrait, I am making the minimum height to 80 viewport height, and the padding is defined right over here. And the same thing, there is some basic styling applied for the text wrapper, for the H2, for the paragraph, and for the button also, but this button we have not created yet. But I already have the styling in place. I'm just going to comment this part for now. I will save this file. And if I go to the browser, you will not see any of the styles being applied right now. And the reason is I have just created these partial files, but I'm not including it anywhere. So basically what I will do is, you see there is the index.scss. Let me just get rid of this file. So I will come here and I'm going to delete the index.css file. And here inside the source directory, I'm going to create a new file and I'm going to call it styles.scss. Since I replaced I'm just replacing the index.css with the styles.scss. So I'm going to change the file associations as well. I'll go inside the index.js and it is importing the index.css file. So this file does not exist right now. So it is going to give me some error. So let me just include the new file that I created. It will be styles.scss. Let me save this. And inside the new styles.scss files, I am going to include the very first partial file, which is the variable. So I will say at import, and I'm going to include // inside the partials directory, and I'm going to include the variables. Under this line, I'm going to make an import for the globals. So at import / partials and globals.scss. And the last one, I'm going to import the styles for our image carousel. So / partials and carousel.scss. I'm going to put a semicolon after. Let me save this. And at this point, if you go to the browser and if I refresh my page, you will see that my styles are getting applied perfectly okay. And this is actually looking like very similar to the slide that I want. So everything is looking good except the fact that the fonts are not getting applied. For this project, I'm using a font called Poppins. I'm going to copy and paste the link from Google Fonts, which is going to apply the Poppins font for my project. So basically I'll go inside my Visual Studio Code and let me close all the files. Inside the public directory, inside index.html, I'm going to come right over here before the title and I'm going to paste this links. So these are the links that will include the Poppins font from Google Fonts. I'm going to save this file, and at this point, if I go back to my browser, you will see that my fonts are also getting applied. Perfect. Now notice one more thing. This is not even looking close to a slider. Of course, the slides are being styled properly, but this is not really a slider. So this is the next thing that I'll start working on. In order to make my component an image slider or image carousel, I'm going to use an npm package called Swiper. So I will go to my Visual Studio Code. I'm going to go to my integrated terminal and I'm going to type this command called npm install Swiper. Once this package is installed, I will go to my component carousel.js and make some necessary imports. I am going to put this import statement which says import Swiper and Swiper slide from Swiper/React, which is just importing Swiper and Swiper slide. Since I am also going to be using the navigation buttons to navigate through the different slides, I am also going to put this import statement which says import Swiper core and navigation from Swiper. Notice that the features like navigation buttons and autoplay have to be imported separately in order to keep the bundle size smaller. And finally, I am going to include the styles by putting the following import statements. Once all the imports are in place, just before my component starts, I will come on to the next line and I am going to put this piece of code which says Swiper core.use navigation, which says to use the navigation buttons when using Swiper. Now at this point, what I will do is to make use of the Swiper and the Swiper slide components that I have just imported. So I'm going to scroll down to the return statement and I'll start by giving the parent div a class name. I'm going to give it a class name of Carousel. I'll move inside this div and I'm going to make the use of the Swiper component. I'm going to cut this piece of code and move it inside the Swiper component. I'm going to save the file here and now I'll move to the inner return statement and I'm going to make the use of Swiper slide component and move my carousel slide inside of Swiper slide component. Now it's a good idea right now to move my key attribute from this component to the parent element. Let me do that. And at this point, if I save everything and if I go to the browser, let me do a refresh. And if I try to slide, you will notice that the Swiper is there, but for some reason, I cannot navigate to the next or the previous slides. In order to fix this problem, I'll go to my VS Code and right before this return statement, I'm going to add a piece of code. Let me get rid of this console log statement and I'm going to paste a piece of code which says if there are no slides to display, then do not render the component at all. Let me save the file here. And now if I go to my browser, let me do a refresh. And now you will see that when I try to swipe, my Swiper is working perfectly as expected. But you will notice there is no navigation buttons appearing at this point. And the reason navigation buttons are not appearing is because we are not making use of navigation. So what I will do is I'll come to my Swiper component and just add an attribute called navigation. Let me save the file here, go back to the browser, and if I refresh, you will notice that the navigation buttons are appearing fine and they are also working. Everything is working as expected. Now that I am done working on the functionality of my image carousel, I will go ahead and add some styling. I will start by adding some styling for my navigation arrow buttons. I will go to my VS Code and I will open the file _carousel.scss. I will go towards the end of this file and then I'm going to paste some CSS, which is basically telling to style the navigation arrow buttons so that the right colors are getting applied and also so that they are positioned in the center of the screen towards the bottom end of the carousel. I'm going to save my file here and if I go to my browser, now you will notice that the navigation arrow buttons are not placed towards the left and the right of the screen anymore, and when you scroll down you will see that they are positioned towards the bottom end of the carousel, and this is exactly what I want. Now I'll go back to my Visual Studio Code. I'll come to the top of this file and here I'm going to add a style rule for .carousel, and here I'm going to say position of relative and a z index of 0. Let me save the file here. Now inside the slide wrap style declaration, I'll come to this line where it says position relative, come on to the next line, and I'm going to copy and paste some styles. So basically here I'm applying a filter property, so I'm applying a sepia filter. I am also adding a transition for the filter property, and for every single direct child of slide wrap I am applying an opacity of 0 with a transform and some transition being applied. Let me save everything here. Now I will scroll down and go inside the text wrap style declaration. I'll scroll down and you will see there is some commented out styles. I'm going to uncomment those styles, save the file again. And now at this point, finally, I'm going to define one more style rule. So I'm going to come to the end of this style declaration and paste some styles. So what I'm saying is when the slide becomes active, then inside the slide wrap, remove the sepia filter that we applied. And also for each and every child element for which the opacity was 0, make the opacity to 1 and remove all the transform that was being applied. I am also adding a transition delay for every single direct child here that adds a staggering kind of an effect, and the same kind of an effect is being added right over here as well. So now I can finally save this file and we are completely done for all the CSS rules that were supposed to be defined for carousel slide. Now what I can do is we can actually go to the browser and check the result. But even before we do that, what we can do is we can actually go to the carousel slide component, and right after where I have defined my paragraph, I'm going to add a link, which is a call to action link with a class name of button and which says learn more. The styles for this button has already been applied inside the carousel.scss. So let me save the file here. And now at this point, if I go to my browser and if I refresh my page, you will notice that there is a learn more call to action button that appears. And if I scroll to the next slide, you will see that the nice transition effects have also been added. So everything seems to work exactly as expected. At this point, we are completely done working on the functionality and the styling of our image carousel. If you come back to the Visual Studio Code in our carousel component, you will notice that we have created a state called isCarouselLoading. Notice that we have created this state, and this state was created in order to display some kind of a loading indicator on the screen when our slides are being fetched from the server. But we are never making the use of this state. And in order to make the use of this state, I'm going to scroll down to where my return statement is. I'm going to come before this if block and I'm going to create another if block. And I will say if isCarouselLoading, then I'm going to return an h2 which says loading. Let me save this. And at this point, if I come back to my browser and let me do a refresh. So when I refresh, you will notice that the loading message appears over here, and here it is so fast. So let me go to my console and I'm going to simulate a slow 3G connection. So I'm going to go to my network, and from here I'm going to select a slow 3G, and let me refresh again. And now you will see that the loading message is appearing first and then our image carousel is loading. So this is exactly what I want. Now we are making the use of that state, the loading state as well. Instead of just displaying a loading message, I would like to use an animated loader component and use it to display as a visual indicator of data being fetched from the server. So now I'm going to start working on our loader component. To create the loader component, I am going to create a folder inside the components directory and I am going to call it loader. Inside this folder, I am going to create a new file called loader.js, and I am going to use the short snippet RAFCE in order to generate a simple functional component. And I'm going to simply render an h1 on the screen which says loading. Let me save the file here, And now I'll go to my app.js and I'm going to replace this h1 with the newly created loader component. Let me save the file here. Now if I go to my browser, you will notice the loading message appearing on the screen. I mentioned before that I do not want to display a loading message but an animated loader. So I will go to this website called loading.io/CSS. So once you go on this website, you will notice a bunch of animated loaders that are made just using HTML and CSS. And I like this loader over here, so I'm going to just click on it to open up the source code. What I can do is I can just copy this HTML and I will come back to my Visual Studio Code and go to the loader component, and I'm going to replace this h1 with the markup that I have just copied. I'm going to replace this class keyword with the class name, and I'm going to give it my own class name. Instead of LDS-ring, I'm going to call it loader ring, something like that. And I'm going to save the file here. And let me do this. Let me format it a little bit. After formatting the code, my loader component looks like this. Now I'll save my file here and I'll go back to the browser to copy the styles. So I'll come here, copy all the CSS, come back to my Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to go inside the partials directory and create a new file called _loader.scss. I'm going to paste the styles that I just copied, and I'm going to replace all the instances of LDS-ring with loader ring. Let me save the file here. I'm also going to replace this white color with the primary color that I have. So I'll say primary color. Let me save the file here. Now I will go inside the styles.scss file and I'm going to import the newly created partial file. So I'll say @import and I'm going to say /partials and loader.scss. I will save the file here, and now we can go on to the browser to see what we have on the screen. Now you will see that the loader appears on the screen perfectly as expected. But at this point, I want my loader to appear in the middle of the screen. So I'm going to go to my Visual Studio Code and I will go inside the loader.js file. And this is the div that wraps our complete loader component. So I'm going to give it a class name of loader wrap. Let me give this class name. Let me save the file here. Now I'll go inside the loader.scss file and I will go just above this and I'm going to say .loader wrap and I'm going to paste some styles here. So what I'm doing is, to this loader wrap, I'm telling to take the complete width available and the height will be equal to the 100% of the height of the viewport, and I'm just saying display flex, align item center and justify content center, which means I am asking this loader to be centered horizontally and vertically on the screen. Let me save the file here, and at this point if I go to my browser, you will notice that the loader appears perfectly in the middle of the screen, and this is exactly what I want. Now that the loader component is ready, I can start using it in my carousel component. So I'll go to my VS Code, I'll open up the app.js and I'm going to remove the usage of loader component. I'll save the file and now I'll go to my carousel.js component. I'm going to scroll down to the line where I'm displaying this loading message. I'm going to replace it with the new loader component that we have just created. I'm going to save the file here, and at this point we are done working on our loader component, and I'll make use of this loader component whenever I'm trying to fetch some data from the server. In the next video we will start working on the about section. Thank you guys for watching this video. Please like and share this video and subscribe to my channel for more videos just like this one. And if you have any questions and thoughts, please post them in the comment section below.